morning, everyone. My name is Lauren Hollows for NOI Education Services, and today we are kicking off our RTO operations series. Now, this was definitely a lot of the focus of the conversations that I had when I was at VELG. I am a data geek, and I find data really interesting. And one of the things that we often do when we go into RTOs is we see that RTOs may have policies, but they definitely have the lack of systems, and particularly underutilization of systems like student management systems to understand their data in order to be able to build strong accountability in their staff. So I want to give like an example of this. For example, when we've got BDMs who are doing enrollments, instead of relying on the numbers that come in from them, I would be basically getting that data directly from my system. I would have every enrollment linked to a BDM, and then I would just pull that report, and then I can actually not only see the numbers of enrollments that my BDMs are doing, I would then be able to see how many of those students actually commence, how many of those students complete, and that's going to potentially give me a picture of the effectiveness of how my BDMs are pitching to people and who they're pitching to, and whether or not they are actually going through a process of like checking suitability and things like that. We do the same for admin in relation to the number of units that they're processing, the student to admin ratio, the student to trainer ratio, trainer completion rates, all of these sorts of things are ways in which we build accountability. We can link KPIs to them and things like that. And it makes a massive difference within RTOs when you have systems that are giving you this information on a very regular basis, when operations and quality and compliance and management can access this data really easily in order to be able to make sure that they're identifying staff who are doing things really well and potentially staff that need some additional support. Additionally, I think with the improvements that we're seeing in AI, improvements in data collection, in reviewing big data, and the move of the new standards to extend the assessment evidence out, because it's going to be going from 6 months to 2 years, and likely a move to collect AVETMISS data more frequently. So under the current standards, there's the 1 year requirement, but under the new standards, it says as frequently as required by the regulator, which could be quarterly, for example. I think it's really important that RTOs are actually spending more time understanding what their data is saying. So there is a lot of RTOs that we go into, we start to work with their systems. They cannot give a lot of information, or the information that they're giving is incorrect. So I've got RTOs that have systems, but they're working off of spreadsheets, and they're telling me their active student number is X, and I'm telling them, no, I'm really, really sorry, but it's G. So this is a really common point of discussion that we have within RTOs. I know that as part of our support services, one of the things that we actually are doing more and more is actually going through that data with management and helping management to understand, what your trainer completion are, what your actual active percentage of students is, what your unique student number is. All of this sort of information is really, really important to RTOs in order to know how to run and operate your business. So some of the things that we'll be covering within the series is we will be talking a lot about completion rates, being able to pull data on the completion rates of your qualifications, of your units of competency, to be able to dissect that by course, by trainer, by funding model, things like that. Being able to actively to define what an active student is. I've had a lot of robust conversations with RTOs in relationship to what they consider is an active student. Some RTOs will consider an active student a student that is like enrolled in a qualification and is in progress. My personal definition of it means you generally actually have to have engagement in training and also course progression. And certainly, course progression is massive within the Crackboss space, but we are seeing that that's going to be entering in as part of the new standards. It's been part of funding contracts. It's been part of, the international environment, but now it's actually being brought through everything. And I think this is going to have an impact, particularly on RTOs that are, highly online, highly fee for service. Thinking about that course progression is going to be an important component of how, we may need to shift some businesses. So defining an active students and looking at how we can better manage those, and then breaking down your actual student numbers. So again, looking at, what number of students you have, whether or not those students are unique, So we've dealt with colleges who, for example, are delivering, they sign students up to a package of a Cert 3, Cert 4, Cert 3, Cert 4 diploma, and they're reporting that they've got 4,000 students. They actually only have 2,000 students because every single student is enrolled into both a Cert 3 and a Cert 4 at the same time. So it's coming up that you've got 4,000 in progress students, when really you've only got 2,000 unique students. And then when you break that number down again to the number of those students that are actively participating in a qualification, that number can come down again. So this is something that's really important for RTOs to understand. If you're going through a sale phase or if you're going through a due diligence phase, is to really understand what your active student numbers are, because your active student numbers are the ones that you're likely to realize your full revenue on. And again, this is another area where we see RTOs that are saying, oh, well, we do 5,000 enrollments a year. Okay, that's great if you do 5,000 enrollments a year, but what's your realization on that revenue? If your completion rate is, 20%, okay, that's great. So you enroll 5,000 students a year, but you only manage to complete 1,000 students a year. So you're only realizing full revenue, especially if you're talking about state funding models, you're only realizing full revenue on 20% of that. Which tells me that you've got some fundamental flaws in your processes, be that in choosing the suitability of your students, be that in how you engage in students to get them, actively engaged in training, be that the training and assessment model itself as to whether or not that lends it to, sufficient course progression. So, RTO managers are often really good at kind of going, okay, well, how much money are we making every month? But we don't spend enough time actually looking at what is the full potential revenue that you can be getting from your students and what's the actual revenue that you're realizing from your students, and where does the fault lie in that process, or where are some improvements that can be made within that process to relatively quickly improve the financial viability of the college. And I'm aware that this is generally a channel that is highly focused on, quality and compliance and things like that. But I do strongly believe that an RTO needs to have a balance of providing quality training and assessment, meeting its compliance requirements, but also being financially viable and ultimately profitable, because what you want to do is you want to find that balance where you are delivering a quality product and service and you're financially viable so that you can continue to provide that quality and service. You can continue to ultimately, if you're making profit, that's what allows you to invest in your RTO to ultimately improve it. And so I think it is important that we do kind of find and strike that balance. There's always that baseline of the compliance requirements, but your data actually does tell you so much about whether or not you do have a really long-term profitable model for your business. And looking and going through this sort of data process is one of the things that will allow you to kind of look at where you may be investing in your RTO and not realizing a lot of gains from it. We particularly see this with scope when we start to go through with clients what their scope actually looks like. And we look at, you've got X amount of qualifications on scope, and then over the last couple of years, this is your utilization of them, and then looking at the resources that go into that. It's really, really interesting. So I wanted just to kind of go through a couple of the things. Now, obviously, everybody knows that I'm a massive advocate of Accelerate. I know that there are other systems that can do this. I've had a little bit more interaction with systems like Job Ready lately, Meshed. There's a couple of others that I've had interactions with. So I know that from some of these systems, you can pull similar data. Accelerate is obviously always going to be my go-to. 90% of our clients are on Accelerate, and I know how to pull the data that I need, how to set up the dashboards that I need. So I'm just going to show you, I'm going to do some screen shares. Obviously, we've redacted some information to be able to protect our clients, but I wanted just to kind of show you guys how you should be setting up some of your dashboards and maybe some of the things that you want to be thinking of in relationship to information that you may want to have to hand on a very regular basis in order to support better operations of your college. So I'm hoping this is going to work. Okay, sure. All right, guys. So hopefully you can see this. This is just a screenshot I've taken of a dashboard. As I said, obviously we've redacted some of the information. This is one of the ones that I definitely like to have across all of my RTOs. In fact, both of these ones are really important to me. First is my in progress enrollments. Okay. So when I say my in progress enrollments, what I actually mean by that is, as I've said, I'm looking for the learners who are actively enrolled and attached to a qualification. It's not a deferred status, it's not a tentative status. So, deferred is something that we might be using in the international space, or it might be a suspended status where we've got a trainee or an apprentice that have had to temporarily pause their traineeship. And we wouldn't be considering tentative. And so tentative is students who have enrolled, okay, but they have not yet commenced. Now that could be because their commencement date, their start date of their actual classes hasn't started yet. It could be because they've done stage 1 of the enrollment, but you may have an orientation process that students need to go through before they actively engage. And as I said, it could be because, for example, you're enrolling students into packages. And so you're enrolling students into a Cert 3, Cert 4 diploma. They're currently studying your Cert 3. They are enrolled to do the Cert 4 and the diploma, but we would not flick them over into an in-progress status yet. We would keep that as tentative because they have not yet commenced it. And so the in-progress enrollments is the ones where they are actively engaged in training in a qualification, okay? So that's actively linked and it's within their, start-end period. Okay, so that's my in-progress enrollments. And what I want to do is I want to have that broken down by qualification. Now, what this often tells me is as I track this sort of stuff throughout the year, this is going to let me know, where I'm potentially investing significant resources for less of a gain. Okay, so where I've got my 1s and 2s, right, those are the ones that I'm going to be regularly reviewing with my client. I'm going to be tracking those over a period of time, like every month, every quarter. And then at the end of the year, we're actually going to look at a review for that. And certainly when it comes to qualifications that are rolling over, if I've only ever done less than 10 students in a qualification, I may seriously consider whether or not we want to invest in developing all the training and assessment resources, noting that your training and assessment resources should be costing you for any qualification anywhere between $20,000 and $40,000 to develop. Okay. And I mean that very, very seriously for people. It should be costing you somewhere between $20,000 and $40,000 for a qualification. Because if you're buying off the shelf resources and you're paying, let's say, $500-$600 a unit, okay, you still need to have a trainer spending time contextualizing those assessments, and then your quality and compliance team going through and reviewing that they're actually compliant, okay, and that you've done all your validation for them, okay? If you're purchasing already pre-contextualized assessments, then you're generally going to be finding that you're going to be looking around about the $2,000 to $3,000 a unit mark to purchase those commercially. That's a fair and reasonable price because of the time and effort that goes into it, and because you're buying a highly bespoke product. It's not something that's sold to as many people, so there's not a volume component for the provider that's offering it. So either one of those ways, or you could be developing it fully in-house. And again, if you're developing it fully in-house, the time that you are going to pay a trainer and assessor, you are probably looking at anywhere between even $3,000 and $4,000 a unit, because you're probably looking at paying somebody, maybe $800, $900 a week, and it's probably going to take them anywhere between 2 and 4 weeks to do a full unit of competency from end to end. So again, just looking at your number of qualifications, looking at the model that you're choosing and things like that, that's the investment that you're going to make, okay? If you've done less than 10 students, it's highly unlikely, depending on the qualification, unlikely that you're going to make more than $30,000, $40,000 of profit from 10 students, okay? Does very much depend on your model. I'm very much aware, if you're delivering in the far north Kimberley, or something like that, or if you're delivering, a highly bespoke fee-for-service model with, one of your larger, mining clients and things like that, you might be able to do that as well. However, it's a serious conversation. It's a serious consideration that needs to be had. People often just let these qualifications tick over. Often we see RTOs that don't even have the resources for qualifications. Seriously need to be considering, what your ratio is. And often it's kind of like your 80-20 where, you're getting maybe 5 or 6 quals where that's the vast majority of the, the money that you're pulling in from the business. So that's the first one that I like to have. I also like to know what my trainer numbers are. So what's my trainer ratio per student? Now, what is reasonable will depend very much on the model that you're delivering. Tricos is going to look incredibly different from online training, is going to look incredibly different from funded training and things like that. An apprenticeship traineeship model that's delivered in the workplace is going to look very, very different from a classroom-based model. Okay, so we could have, one trainer that is delivering to 15 students. They're delivering a 1 day a week model to 5 different classes. And so they may have 75 students allocated to them. We may have another trainer that's got 150 because they are doing a work-based apprenticeship model where they're seeing 5 to 6 apprentices in the workplace at a time, but they're only seeing them every 6 weeks. Okay, so it's, and you might have another model whereby you've got a trainer who's only, you've got a trainer who's only working 1 day a week. They've got one class of 14 students. And so, that's the model that they're working with. So what's going to be suitable is going to be very, very different, depending on the delivery model that you've got. But I want to have that information to hand because I want to see when those numbers start to drop. I want to see when we start to get significant increases and things like that. The other reason for doing this is because I can then start to pull data like what's the completion rates of the students, right? How is the trainer going in relationship to course progression? If I've got 2 trainers delivering in the same delivery model, same cohort, and I've got one trainer getting an 85, 90% completion rate on every unit, I've got another one getting a 60% completion rate on every unit, same cohort, same assessment tools that we're working with. What's happening with one that's not happening with the other? Is there some support that trainer A can lend to trainer B? Is it actually that we probably should actually be getting more around the 60% mark because of the cohort that we're dealing with? And so, is trainer A being a lot more lenient? This, kind of goes towards how we manage our validation. So, that some of that data might tweak me to kind of start to look at, at the validation for that particular person. 100% completion rate on every unit, on every qualification in a very short period of time. That might be something that might trigger me. An incredibly low completion rate might trigger. So I like to have trainer numbers. And again, I like to be able to, there's a lot of more information that we can pull out. Enrollments by month can also be very helpful, mainly because, obviously in this particular model, we see February is always a big time. This particular one does a lot of work with schools. So February makes sense. That's when they kind of take all of their enrollments. But if you're working on more of a fee for service or a training and apprenticeship model, we want to be able to see what those highs and lows are. We can then track that over a period of time. So I could pull this report out to, let's look at the last 2-3 years and let's see where we're hitting those peak periods and let's see where we've got those low periods, and that's going to fall into my budgeting. And I'm kind of going to go, okay, well, I know I'm going to get really low commencements at this time of year. And so I know that, our lodgements are potentially going to be lower at this particular point in time, et cetera, et cetera. We know we're going to get a big, if you've got a big bump here, then potentially you're going to get a big bump financially, the month or two following that. So that's some of the information that I can have from there. Second dashboard that we've got. So this is from a very different RTO. They operate in a different space. And so what we want to see here is we want to see information about breakdown of delivery location. Again, we could split program codes, but we could do that by, short courses and things like that. And then this is obviously my units of competency. And the reason why I want to do that is this is really going to heavily determine what I'm going to be validating on a regular basis. Okay, so there's all of these sorts of things that kind of go into what we're doing. And I think it's just a really good practice to have that sort of information to hand and for managers to be reviewing that on a fairly regular basis. In an ideal world, what I think is best is that at least once a quarter, you've got a really good hold on that sort of data and what you want to be, how you want to be handling that. I think that's a good practice. Better if you're dealing with that every month, and even better if you're logging into Accelerate on a regular basis, like especially if you're an RTO manager on the ground, and you've got strong responsibilities for, budgeting KPIs, things like that. managing your staff, I think that you want to be looking at that on an even more regular basis, like day sometimes. So that's just a little bit. We are going to go into each of these things in a lot more detail throughout the series. If you guys have got any questions on this, by all means, feel free to ask. If you've got specific reports that you would like to know, if you've got specific questions in and around how you can go about managing this and how this then links into accountability with staff, more than happy to go through that as well. We will be touching on that in further episodes. Otherwise, I hope you guys found this helpful. If you disagree, by all means, do so respectfully. Ask any questions you want in the comments. I hope you guys have a great day and you have found this useful. My name is Lauren Hollows, NOI Education Services.